Because I don't think realistically the majority of people, when they saw the group, fancied them to get out, but maybe win a couple of games and get themselves in Europa. Their home games, they were competitive, I have to say. I watched 2 of them and they did really. The Lazio game.
Surely that's the very least Celtic fans can expect.
There's a difference. When I'm saying competitive, I mean in the games. In terms of chances and going toe for toe. Competing can be running around and trying your best while getting hammered. You can still compete even though you get a good beating. They were in the games. And even last night they had a couple of chances. But he's right in a way. I mean, I think if you want to compete at Champions League level, you need more quality than Celtic have. The problem is with that is that it costs money. And but they only pay a certain level of wages. And you can only entice a certain level of player to Celtic or Rangers because they're playing in a league that's nowhere near as exciting or competitive as most of the other leagues in Europe.
But before the ball was kicked in this Champions League campaign, Danny,
nobody thought
he could have told us that.
Well, yeah, that's true. Yeah, but you suppose.
So in other words,
what you're asking
after all the huffing and puffing, we've learnt nothing about Celtic in Europe.
Well, I think he'll have learned a lot about some of the players in the squad who he hasn't seen play at that level before.
I make this argument, and I make you right on this argument when I'm talking about Atletico Madrid and Lazio, but I don't make you right when we're talking about Feyenoord, because Feyenoord don't pay bigger. First of all, Feyenoord's turnover isn't bigger than Celtic's, and secondly, their performances in the group are 5 points bigger than Celtic's. And you look at the comparable amount of money that the turnovers, you look at the availability of funds, because the one thing that we all argue with is that it's very unfair to look at Scottish football when we turn around and suggest that they've got huge broadcasting deals in most other leagues besides the tuppence halfpenny that you get in the Scottish League. That's now been upsized by the fact that the Scottish clubs now get directly into the Champions League group stages and haven't got to go through the qualifying games as a result of being champions. So we know that Celtic get £80 million a year as their turnover. Basic turnover. Feyenoord is something similar. So there's no reason why Celtic shouldn't be getting more points out of games like Feyenoord than they've currently got. And
but Simon, can you use the money argument? Over a year ago, Rangers got all the way to Seville, albeit in the old UEFA Cup, in the Europa League final.
Yeah.
So they lose to Eintracht Frankfurt, who are no movers and shakers in world football either. But having said that, they got to a final. Yeah. So that the money aspect of things didn't come into that for Rangers to almost go all the way.
Well, I actually see. I'm
and
with
for
you.
Rangers read Celtic.
But I'm with you. I'm negating the money argument. But if the money argument was there, we'd be able to counteract it by suggesting that Feyenoord's performance, which has got them 6 points and potentially into the Europa League, is the kind of performances on a cost base. The argument will always be Celtic don't have the finances to compete in the Champions League, so they can't get the best players. Danny started it with that conversation.
Right.
They don't pay the wages.
Right.
I would then say, fair enough, if you're talking about the Italian leagues and the Spanish leagues, but when you're talking about the Eredivisie, with due respect, that's not an argument you can run. So Celtic coming out with 1 point, with Feyenoord coming out with 6, and Feyenoord not getting through the Champions League group, but getting the added benefit of dropping into the Europa League.
Yeah.
So getting the Champions League money, 35 million quid. Thanks for turning up in the Champions League. Bang, you go down to the Europa League. Off you go, getting a raft of games in there, and a degree of money from that as well.
Am I right?
Celtic not achieving that. But the other argument again is also in Brendan's favour, which we haven't liked to be recently, is this newfound hero at Tottenham Hotspur put out the same performances.
Yeah,
but
you're nothing new for Celtic.
But your comparison to Feyenoord, I might be wrong with this. I don't think so. They've only played them away, haven't they? They lost. They haven't played them at home yet.
Yeah, but
they haven't played them at home.
So
the best they get is 4 points.
You are talking about two equal clubs in finance.
But the best they can get is 4 points.
Yeah.
So Feyenoord will get 6 points going to Feyenoord have now qualified for the Europa League.
Feyenoord have had a better game against one of the other teams because Lazio aren't great, and so should have beaten them at home. But if you're talking about comparing the financial capabilities or income of Feyenoord and Celtic, arguably if Feyenoord played Celtic 5 times at home and 5 times away, you'd probably get equal results there or thereabouts. So I think they would. You're talking about a one-off game where Feyenoord got something against Lazio.
But I'm also saying that Feyenoord, they've managed to get points of other teams.
But let me just finish the argument. Feyenoord should, and I think always will, probably have a better side than Celtic, because you're looking at a country that produces much better young players from a much bigger pool of talent. So you don't have to buy in players. Okay, you're bringing them through the system.
But that's interesting. I don't know how many of the Feyenoord players are Dutch players and how relevant
that is. It'll be a good number.
Yeah, and I don't know how many of the Celtic players are Scottish players.
That'll be an half-decent number. But what I'm telling you is that the Dutch system is better than the Scottish system, and it's got bigger numbers and better players to choose from. So what you're then doing is you can't compare the finance, because what the Dutch league does and what the Dutch youth system does is create a bigger number of quality footballers than the Scottish system. And that's because there's more numbers, better coaches, more money put into it, etc., etc. So you can't just look at the finances. I agree.
I mean, are Lazio world beaters? Are they so far ahead of Celtic?
No, but they got lucky at Celtic.
Mid-table in Serie A.
Did you see the Celtic Lazio game where they lost in the last minute? Celtic should have won the game.
Ironically, it was Feyenoord who beat Celtic. The other final that they got to of the European Cup all these years ago.
If Celtic had have got through the group, they were punching above their weight.
No one's making that argument.
No, but the argument is this, Danny. How can Celtic become the first British club having won it? Having been the first British club to win it in 1967, now they've racked up another headline of the sort you don't want. 15 games without winning the Champions League.
Yeah, it's not a good run, but Simon makes a great point about Ange. He's a hell of a good manager. We've seen it already. He gets Scott Tottenham playing, and we're eulogising about him. Rightly so.
So what's the quality that Brendan's talking about that's going to change that?
Well, it
doesn't exist.
They spent 22 million. They spent 22 million euros in the transfer window in this year. That was the Celtic spend. They sold 30-odd million euros worth of players. So they sold more than they bought in. And with the turnover that they've got, I would expect Celtic to be more competitive in Europe than they currently are being in the last 2 seasons. Now,
so they haven't spent any money then?
So they haven't spent a great deal of money.
None.
And I take Danny's point about the nature of the beast in terms of the better development of Dutch players, perhaps more availability of them.
Numbers.
And slightly more competitive league. I take all those points. But I still believe that Celtic should be not pricing into their thinking that they're going to get out of this Champions League qualifying group, but to lose. And it's not fair to go back to 1967 because that was a landscape that was completely different. You had the maximum wage. You had Johnny Haynes running around campaigning for the maximum wage to be
but they
removed
still
from
wrote a
footballers.
headline. Oh, Simon, Celtic winning in 1967 was a massive headline.
I know it was, but
they're all coming from the same neighbourhood virtually.
Yeah, but it's not relative to now.
But it's not relative to now because the whole
but
landscape
that was a
has
headline
shifted.
that Celtic fans embrace and quite rightly still embrace
Absolutely.
today and hold close to their hearts.
Well, then you might as well bring Preston North End up in every conversation every time they play on a pitch because they were one of the inaugural winners of the FA Cup and league winners.
The problem is I cannot see
Tom
anything.
Finney, Stan Mortensen, whoever else.
Anything was in the aftermatch chat there with Brendan. I can't see anything that he's saying that is going to translate into changing the landscape.
Well, give us more money is what he's saying. And if you're spending £20 million a season,
you're not,
and you're sending 30, and you're selling £30 million worth of players. If you want me to be more successful in Europe, I would say be a better coach, right? But notwithstanding that, be a better coach and at the same time be given a little bit more ammunition, perhaps. Because 2 coaches, one that's at this moment in time, slightly gone off the boil, but one that everyone loves, Ange, produced the same rubbish outcome.
It is 11:30.
Jim White and Simon Jordan. Monday to Friday mornings from 10 on AM, on DAB, via the talkSPORT app and on your smart speaker. talkSPORT.